It's another COVID thing. Nobody comes to early days Zooms anymore.
Okay. Morning, everybody, or wherever you are, afternoon or evening. Welcome. We'll just wait a minute or so to let people into the room. Hope everybody's having a good day. It's hot and sunny here in Arlington, Virginia. Maybe summer has officially begun, although we're not there yet, but it's like supposed to be 90 here, so I'm a happy camper. I hope it's lovely where you are. So welcome, everybody, to the Digital Trade and Data Governance Hub and the Trustworthy AI in Law and Society Institute are pleased to bring you a webinar on should the U.S. government establish a publicly funded AI option, which I think is a fascinating question. And I'd like to just thank our sponsors at GW, as well as the Bridge, the Center for International Governance Innovation, and Trails. So our speaker today is Bruce Schneier. Bruce Schneier is an internationally renowned security technologist. He's the author of over 12 books, including A Hacker's Mind, which is an incredible work. And he's also, I would call him a sort of flamethrower in terms of ideas, which I really appreciate. And this webinar will be moderated by Daumé III, who is the director and PI of Trails, the Trustworthy AI Institute for Law and Society. And he's also the director of the AI Interdisciplinary Institute at the University of Maryland. So welcome, everybody. Then let's get started. Hal?
Yeah.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Bruce, do you want to start with a provocation?
Wow, I think we should start with conversation. I think a lot about AI and trust. I think a lot about trustworthy AI. I think that is going to be something that we are going to have to deal with. Just today, I saw an article that showed that Google is using its AI, its conversational AI, to display ads. And I think that is going to be something that is going to be a problem going forward, that these sites will be increasingly increasing demand for them to monetize their AI. And, we're going to have no reason to trust them. When we get an answer to a question, that it is accurate, or is it the answer that has someone has paid them to give. I think the fact that they are conversational, the fact that they are intimate, will make it easy for us to be fooled into thinking of them as friends and not just as tools. So I think AI is going to really stress test our human notions of trust, whether it's interpersonal trust or societal trust. And we have to think about that. I mean, do we really want these technologies to be built for the near-term financial benefit of a bunch of tech monopolies, or do we want some other way? But the notion of trust and trustworthiness, what that means for AI, is going to matter a lot. So I don't know. I'd rather this be a conversation than me just talking, because people talking on Zoom, we've all had enough of.
So I guess, this question of trust in AI systems, right? So the thing that we're, so close to be talking about is sort of like public options for models, right? So, I mean, one thing that I think about a lot is, right, like, well, some people trust tech companies, some people trust the government, right? Like some people trust neither. And so if we're thinking about like trust in these systems, it's hard for me to imagine that, who builds the system doesn't matter. So can you say, I don't know, what do you think about, how people trust organizations and what that means in terms of who should be building these systems?
Right. So this is a hard conversation because trust is a really tough word. It is overloaded. It has many different meanings. We use that word in many different ways. When I trust a friend, it's very different from trusting an organization or a system or a government, right? One is interpersonal. Like I know you and I know that who you are and how that will inform your behavior. That's very different than I trust the post office to deliver a package, or I trust FedEx to deliver a package. So that is this interpersonal trust, which is that you and I, and that more social trust, which might be organizations. And the second one is very different, but it's the one that scales. Right? I can ask you to deliver a package for me across town, and depending on who you are, you might or might not do it, and I'll know whether to trust you to do it, to do that favor for me. But if we're going to make like FedEx, it's not going to work based on, well, I know the driver and he's a good person, so I'm going to give him my package, right? It's a very different type of trust. It's incredibly different. Yet that's the only one that'll scale to the international delivery service. Or when I trust an airline, or the pilot on the airplane who I've never met, or my Uber driver who I've never met. So, people talk about, I trust an organization. What they're really saying is, I can predict their behavior, right? I don't know if that Uber driver is a mass murderer. And actually, I don't care. Because all I know is he's going to deliver me like across town because, right, the app has us both under surveillance and we're competing for star rankings, right? So the technology.
So there's some sort of like external incentive.
But this is important, right? A lot of things, some of them technological, some social, some legal, impose a structure on our relationship that I can trust the organization in context. I actually don't trust the Uber driver. I trust Uber as a company. I don't trust the pilot. I trust Delta Airlines to put well-trained and well-rested pilots in cockpits on schedule. Right? So move this to AI. Right? It's a Google AI. It's OpenAI, which is like a Microsoft AI. It is a Facebook Meta AI. So it's not that I trust the company in the same way I trust a friend. I wouldn't let them like babysit my baby. I'm going out and, and Facebook is babysitting. That's like, no, right? It is, I trust the company in this particular context to do these particular things. Way different than if they are trustworthy, right? If you're an organization, you spend a lot of time making sure you are trusted. And one of the ways to do that is to be trustworthy. Another way is to completely untrustworthy, make sure nobody knows about it. So, right, and the reason these companies are trustworthy to the extent they are is they know they'll get in trouble, like with customers if they're not, or they'll break the law if they're not. Right? A lot of this falls away with tech monopolies, right? There's no competition. You got to worry about losing customers. A lot of this falls away with free services. Like, since Google just spies on you in exchange for free services, they kind of don't care that much. And they're also a monopoly. Right. And then you have the additional problem of money in politics, meaning, the rich can buy the policy they want. So there's a lot of complication here. So when I look at trustworthy AI, right? And if you think about AI, we want them to be, let's think about AI personal assistants. And I think that's going to be the one of the killer apps here. We want it to be our travel agent, our relationship counselor, our therapist, our life coach, our assistant in many ways. We're going to want to trust them with all of our information very intimately. And yet, in the current configuration, they'll be spying at us behind our backs.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the way these systems work. So it's going to be a mismatch. And that's going to be dangerous, I think.
One thing you brought up that I think is kind of interesting is, right, like you mentioned sort of trust in context, right? And like, sort of historically with AI tools were developed for specific things, right? We have, Google Maps, right? Like routes me, and, Netflix recommends movies and whatever, right? Like everything does like sort of one specific thing. And like increasingly we're seeing models where it's like, we don't really know what they do, right? Like they sort of purport to do everything, but they kind of fall apart on a lot of things. But it seems like that makes this context question a lot harder, because it's like, well, I'll trust, Gemini to write my history paper, but does that mean I'll trust it to, write interview questions for Bruce Schneier, right? And And yet it's the same sort of like underlying technology.
I think, right, this is the generative nature that we're starting to see these more general purpose AI systems. And in the future, that's going to be blurred. I think you'll see the general purpose systems being the natural language front end to all of those special purpose systems, right? So it's a specialized AI that, reads chest x-rays. And right now they're better than human radiologists. So, right, we're good with that. They'll be called by this general natural language AI, a specialized AI that plays chess or Go, right, better than a human grandmaster. And it is, but I think that notion that they're becoming general feeds into our general notions of interpersonal trust. So I think this is the problem, right? They are, it'll speak to you in a natural language. You'll respond to it in kind. If it's a robot, it'll look humanoid. It sort of interacts with your whole of existence. It is, it is, oh, I don't know what to say. It is authoritative. It uses your mannerisms, your cultural references. It has a confident tone. Its personality is optimized to exactly what you like. All of this kind of hacks our notions of trust. Like, we are predisposed to trust humans who act that way. So you're asking, right? I mean, do I trust it to write my term paper versus recommend, I don't know, a vacation plan? Right? We're going to kind of transfer our notions of trust, because if it's a friend, I'm going to try to trust it for both. As I interact with that friend, I'll kind of know their competences. Right? I mean, I'll trust this friend to lend them $10, but I'm not going to let them babysit my child. They can babysit my child, but I'll never give them a house key. Well, sure, I'll give them my house key, but I wouldn't tell them my personal secrets. And then this person, I'll tell my personal secrets, but I would never dare lend them $10. Like, we can do that. With people, we are great with that. I mean, pretty much all of our human evolution is focused on, do we trust humans in our local orbit? Right? That is a massive survival skill in a species as social as ours. So, we might get that with AIs. I mean, this AI, it's great at answering factual questions, but I would never have it talk to it about, I don't know, asking it about my relationship. I mean, AI is therapist. I mean, there's a lot of talk about that. Or this one's great at helping me figure out how to navigate bureaucracy. Right? And maybe there'll be folk conversations. I mean, I'll tell a friend, I use this AI to help me fill this government form. It was great. But they're also going to change very fast. We're living in a world where, things you learned about AI 6 months ago are not true anymore. But they don't get math wrong anymore. They cite their references now. That great story about the AI, the attorney had the AI write a brief for court and made up cases, doesn't do that anymore. Right? So are we going to be able to keep up? I mean, what happens when a friend changes. It takes you a while to realize your friend has changed. Yeah. And sometimes you don't. Right? Couples will get divorced because one person changes. The other person doesn't really want them to change. It's going to be a weird ride as these artificial systems start taking on human characteristics. And natural language is the thing we are primed to recognize as another person. To the extent of, we watch a cartoon character speak and we think it's another person. And if someone speaks a foreign language, some of them we have trouble thinking of them as another person. They're not speaking to us. So we are going to get this so wrong so much. And I worry that the AI systems, this will get us to public AI, that the corporate run for-profit AI systems will take advantage of that. Yeah. Right? You ask it where to have a vacation, and did it tell you what's best for you, or did it tell you what it got a kickback to say? You ask about a political issue, is it going to be honest, or is it going to tip the scales? A few months ago, not sure anymore, when you asked the Google AI whether Amazon was a monopoly, it said yes. When you asked it whether Google was a monopoly, it kind of hedged. right? Is that a natural artifact of the data, or did Google do something? We have no idea. And the fact that we have no idea is the problem.
So yeah, so I think this is like a, sort of natural transition to sort of this public option question, right? So, we have these systems, and like I love this term that you use, right? That like they hack us, right? Like they're really good at making us trust them even when maybe we shouldn't, right? And so, given that that's sort of the nature of the technology, like why should the government make this thing, right? Like, and they're going to have these same questions, right? Like, what does it say when asked if Google or Amazon is a monopoly? And is this going to be taken to be some sort of like government view on this question? Or yeah, so can you speak to that a little?
So I don't necessarily think government should. So I want a public AI. I want an AI model that is not built under a corporate for-profit umbrella. It could be a government. It could be an NGO. It could be a university. It could be, a couple of guys in a basement. I kind of don't care. And it doesn't have to be in the US. It could be anywhere on the planet. But I think, I don't want to replace these corporate AIs. I think we need a counterpoint. Right? I think we need something that is trustworthy, whose behavior is understood, limitation understood, whose training is understood, whose biases are understood, whose goals are understood, and who aren't secretly working for somebody else. Right? It just came out that the new Microsoft Copilot AI, they want it to train on everything you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. It's a better AI if they do. But now your question is, do you want Microsoft to know everything you do? So, you might say yes, but you might say no. And you want to have an option. Yeah. So I think of it as a non-market driven AI, right? That isn't going to be tempted by surveillance capitalism, that isn't going to be tempted to sell your data. And basically, when getting back to trust, it is government who provides the underlying mechanisms for social trust in our society, right? Think about, I don't know, contract law or property law or personal safety or health codes or, anything that we talk about, boarding a plane, eat at a restaurant, buy a pharmaceutical without worry. Right? So it is not necessary. I want to step back and say, so what I mean by trustworthy AI is I don't mean a model that is public, right? So that is like, I don't know, Meta's model, right? They've released the weights to the public and a lot of people work on them. So that's a corporate model, the public is free to use. It is not a corporate model the government is licensed. It is not even an open source model that you could examine. It is a model built ground up, right, from using these public principles. There was a question asked, I see in the chat, why isn't Bloom or OLMO sufficient? Not sure of the details, but I don't think they go from ground up, right? And I think that's really important. That is not built under corporate for-profit motives at all. Another question so I see, given distrust in the government, how can you trust government to do this? I get it. Given the distrust in corporations, how can you let corporations do this? We don't trust anybody, so we need a variety. All right? It's not like government does this and corporations don't. Is if I have both running, I could compare them against each other. Maybe I can see more easily where the biases are. Right? So I want a counterpoint to corporate AI. Doesn't have to be the government. And if you don't like the US government, maybe it'll be France, or Australia, or Japan. Right? There's a public model coming out of the Middle East, we think. Is that good enough? Maybe. It's really going to depend on how it's built. But I just don't want this technology that is so critical only, in the hands of a bunch of US tech monopolies. It just seems like not a good way to put all of our eggs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the challenges here is sort of the capacity question, right? So like, let's set aside the question of like compute capacity, right? Like there's NAIR and there's, you know, government labs that have bajillion GPUs, right? Or if you go to Saudi Arabia or UAE, right? Like you have lots of computer, like Switzerland just got, I think like a 10,000 GPU cluster. But let's set that aside for a second, right? Like let's assume that compute is like solved, right? So there's also the talent question, right? And like currently people who are, you know, basically every tech company in the US at least is trying to snatch up LLM engineers,
Right.
and paying them outrageous sums of money in order to build these things. So, you know, sort of like in that landscape, you know, how do you see something like this getting started?
Just a couple of things. Well, I actually do want to talk about the compute because this is an open question. Right now, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to create a foundation model. We have no idea if that's going to be true in the next couple of years. You know, we are seeing cheaper, smaller models, almost as good. I saw a paper about a 1-bit model, kind of crazy, but it's working well. You know, there are models you can run on your phone. So we don't know if this enormous expense is temporary or permanent. So I want to lay that out because we're just kind of assuming that it'll cost a gazillion dollars. Talent is an issue. I mean, right now, the tech monopolies basically hire all the talent to make sure it stays out of the hands of startups. The way you solve that is you offer competitive salaries. Lots of people don't want to work for those behemoths. They'd like an alternative. And in the scheme of, you know, buying an aircraft carrier, this is in the noise. I mean, you know, it's not cheap, but it's not stupid. If we as society want to do this, we can easily do it. We just have to want to do it. We have to think it's important.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's an issue, especially if it's made, if you know, if you do it internationally, you have a consortium do it. You know, it doesn't have to be out of a national lab. I mean, so if you think about like a lot of nuclear research, we decided that for nuclear research, right? You know, we didn't want it in the hands of corporations, too a little dangerous, a lot classified. So we built 3 or 4 national labs in the United States to do a lot of that work. And we decided to keep that in government. We could do that here, right? Whoever asked about trusting, you know, government to build AI, I mean, how do you trust government with nuclear weapons? What kind of craziness is that? Yet, like we have since the 40s and haven't thought twice about it. I tend to have very little patience for libertarian nonsense. So just tell you right off the top.
So you kind of hinted there at like, you know, if we have the will, we should do it. So, you know, what is the, you know, what are the 3 things that you would say that would be the selling point here? Like, you know, what are the like real tangible benefits that we would get out of doing this?
So I think there are, and they're really unknown though, that a model that is open and public from end to end. Right. So, you know, someone asked in the questions about, you know, can you really trust OpenAI not to use data even you opt out? Right. That's a perfect example. Like, you would be able to trust an open system, a transparent system of how they use data. We would know, even if like the individuals tried to be dishonest. So I think you get transparency, which is really valuable. I believe the models will behave differently. I don't have a better answer than that because that is a hunch. But my belief is that an AI that is not built for profit will behave differently. And I think we need to test that. So we will get to test that. And then it is generative. It'll open up an enormous world of innovation. If there is a public model that anybody can build on without having to pay for or license or worry about, you know, the constraints about what they're allowed to do, you're going to have an enormous amount of innovation. And I think that'll be phenomenal.
So on this last point, right, like, I mean, we've seen, for instance, a bunch of companies take like Meta's Llama model and basically build startups on top of it.
Which is fantastic, right? And I think that gets halfway there. That's the model is available. But
That's Falcon as example, the
Yeah.
UAE
Right.
funded.
I want the beginning to be available also. Like, how is the llama model trained? We kind of don't know.
Yeah, what data is it in? I mean, I think there's also, you know, I don't want to be too conspiracy theorist here, right? But like when OpenAI folks were asked, like, was Sora trained on all of YouTube? They kind of hemmed and hawed, right? Like, it's like, I don't know. Which like, I don't know how you don't know. But
Right. And I don't think that's conspiracy talking. That is, I mean, you know, the fact that they won't answer the question is a problem. I mean, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but we want to know.
yeah.
Like, also,
But
did they
so,
train
you know,
on
I
the
mean,
output of video games? Another question that was asked that they didn't seem to know the answer to.
yeah.
But of course, right. I mean, the fact that they're lying is not useful.
Yes. Or even, you know, not giving a straight answer. But you know, it makes me think, right? So like if we were to build, you know, some public option in whatever way, right? Whoever builds it, right? Like decisions need to be made about what data goes in, what data doesn't go in, right? And I mean, in fact, that's probably one of the most basic decisions that's going to get made. And so people are going to have, you know, someone is going to have to make these decisions about like, well, are we going to use copyrighted information as input to the system? Are we going to, you know, like, what is our view on fair use, right? And, you know, if you at least accept that, you know, sort of like more data is generally better, then, you know, to get a better model, you might not have like the market pressure to use more data, but you're going to have the pressure because you want a better model to use more data. And it seems like, you know, as a company, they can kind of hide a lot of this. But you know, if it's open, you can't hide this, right? And so you
Right, so
have
this isn't better. If it's a company, they can break the law and not tell anybody, so that's better. I'm not convinced that's good. I mean, if you are a government, there's a lot more you can do with compensating people for their data. You have a lot of flexibility. As I'm actually writing a piece about that right now, how a public model could compensate people who make data. This is hard, right? Because in effect, you know, my books are in the corpus. You know, one of the corpuses was public web books, and I have some books in there. The amount of value they get from my books is infinitesimal. Right? They could give me $1, but it would take more work for them to give me the dollar than the right. It doesn't work that way. And really, what we're worried about is less our data is being used and more our future jobs are at risk. Right? That is the real fear. But we're not going to deal with that fear by paying you for your content, right? The value to the AI of this video is infinitesimal, right? It's not, there's no value. Yet the value to all of these Zooms is enormous, right? But just the denominator is so large. The government has more flexibility. You know, we have to really think about what happens if there is massive job loss. I worry about apprentice professions, right? If AI does a lot of the lawyering, a lot of the sort of base level lawyering, where do the new law school graduates go, and how do we get the top lawyers? Because lawyering is a pyramid, and we can't replace the bottom of the pyramid with AI and think the pyramid's going to survive. But so all of these things are bigger than the corporate focus. And I think government is going to be a better place to deal with that. You know, I don't think we're up for that. I mean, this is the United States. I mean, right, governing us is a mess. But we do have to think about using copyright material, copyrighted voices, right? There's the whole debate right now about the stolen copyrighted voice from that OpenAI did. But these, I think, it would be better figured out at a policy level than at a corporate level. Let's keep stuff secret and hope nobody sues us system, which is what we got. Again, I don't want to replace. I'm looking for an alternative that is in the mix.
Bruce, I don't know if you're familiar, but our next webinar is going to be on digital solidarity. And this, the United States is now trying to lead an effort to foster the collaboration that would be necessary to a public model, as you are suggesting, but they haven't, suggested yet a nair for everyone because it's quite protectionist right now, or suggested a public model. How do you think we can get there?
You don't know. I need one country to do it. UK Labour Party has this in their platform. There are people I've talked to congressional staffers. EU is thinking about this. Just need somebody to do it. I don't know, but I think talking about it and talking about the benefits is one way to recognize its value. I agree. I think it's hard to get from here to there. It might take the models becoming cheaper. I mean, if everybody's making models in their on their computers every week, suddenly this all goes away. That we get public models, but it is interesting to watch the data. Hey, New York Times is suing OpenAI. It's really don't use my data. It's really pay me for my data. Like Reddit is selling its data. Twitter, turns out that guaranteed human data, so anything like before 2019, is really valuable. So these data stores are now, in aggregate, are extremely valuable. And there's an article earlier this year that Meta was thinking of buying Simon & Schuster, buying the publishing company for the data. They decided to steal it anyway, right? It's cheaper than buying it, but that's the kind of upside down world we are in. So I see a question from Lance Hoffman, who's a colleague. So actually,
Bruce, if I may.
All right. Okay. Sorry, Lance.
Read the questions. I certainly will get to Lance, who I'm a great admirer of. But let's. I want to just say, please put your questions in the Q&A. Please don't put your comments in the Q&A because we're only going to ask and answer these questions. Okay, so let's begin with, since the first 4 comments, can you really trust OpenAI, I don't know what MS is, to not actually use Microsoft to not actually use your data, even if you opt out? Do you want to answer that?
Of course not.
Okay.
That was an easy answer.
Hal, do you want to comment on that since you actually are affiliated with Microsoft?
Well, that probably I shouldn't comment for exactly that reason. No, but I think I think this broad question of what is the value of opt-out, right? It's I think that, it's like Bruce said, right? It's fundamentally the question is it, better to do what people say and not risk, and not risk getting sued versus the alternative. And, not to put words in Bruce's mouth, right? But it seems like one potential advantage to a public model is that you're no longer playing or a public option, right? Is that you're no longer trying to do these calculations in the back of your head.
Right. We just had Google just settled a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit about incognito mode. Right. They said they weren't spying on their users, and they were. Because if you read the fine print just exactly the right way, they were allowed to. So, you got to really read it. You got to be an attorney and read it that way and know that the company will do everything possible, to cheat legally, maybe illegally, and act accordingly. But this is our system. I'm not picking on Microsoft. Right? If the CEO didn't want to do that, he'd be fired and replaced with a less moral CEO. That's the way our system works.
Thank you, Bruce.
I do agree that go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to read the next question.
I was just going to say, it seems like basically one should assume that there's loopholes in almost every terms of service, right? That is probably a fair working assumption.
Which is a dumb way to run society. Right? I mean, let's set it up so that there are legal agreements that you don't know what they mean and you're forced to sign. Hooray. What kind of, who thought of this kind of system? Yet it is what we're stuck with.
Well, the same people who devised the internet and forgot to include security.
That is not true. That is a malign lie. Okay, we have to do that. Nobody forgot to use security. When the internet was developed, this is actually important. it was designed for the endpoints to handle security. The only computers attached to the internet were multi-user computers that had security built in. So the designers didn't put security in the network because the endpoints are handling it. What happened in the 1980s is that single-user computers that were never designed for networks were attached to networks that were never designed for single-user computers. That is the problem. That is way different than Mark Zuckerberg thinking it's okay to drop democracy in the pursuit of profit.
You're right, and thank you for the correction. So the next question is, do you think all-in massive models will eventually disappear for smaller, more specific models? For example, the questioner says, I could see museums releasing models specific to their own collections.
I think it's going to be all the above. Right? I mean, you're going to need, I mean, like lots of specific models that are non-generative. I mean, the model that plays chess is not the model that answers, that writes poems for you. The model that reads chest X-rays is different in such. Generative models, the next word predictor, next pixel and image predictor, tend to be general. But even now, they're going to be tuned. Right? OpenAI wants GPTs, where these are tuned models. I've been playing with is a Quai AI, which is a nonprofit trying to do personal AIs, trying to make a Bruce bot. I'm trying to make an AI that like speaks like me, like given my, it's not that great yet, but it's going to get better. So I think there's going to be a lot of these specialized, a travel agent bot, one of the, I forget where it is, but there is a relationship counselor bot that a lot of people are using. And I don't know, it seems a bit scary to me, but people are getting good results, I think. I don't know. But there's going to be also need for these general purpose bots. So I think you're going to have both. I think we're going to live in a world where these models call each other. I think we're going to solve the compute problem that some of these models are very expensive to run by having simpler models call more complex models or more specialized models as they need them. I think so you're going to see this kind of ecosystem of models. So I think that's part of it. So it's kind of all the above.
Thank you. Speaking of the ecosystem, how do you see specialized agents playing a role in the future when tied to multiple models?
I think I just said that.
Oh, okay. What do you think of DARPA doing something like this?
Sure, why not? I'm being efficient. You got a lot of questions.
No. Yeah.
People need to add more though, because
no, I mean,
you might be too efficient.
Sure, DARPA can do it. If they decided, I mean, right? Is this a national security issue? Probably. Do they have the fund? Sure.
Would a public model allow anyone to build off what build off the model? What do you think about state actors putting those models to nefarious usage?
State actors will put all technologies we develop to nefarious use. Right? And I mean, we could say this about cars. We can say this about the internet. We can say this about restaurants, for heaven's sakes. So yes, sure. And we have to deal with that. I mean, the problem of super empowered individuals is not an AI problem, but it is a technology problem. But you do not solve that by banning the technology. Right? I can saw if my problem is that terrorists have to eat dinner, my solution is not to make restaurants illegal. Right? That's not gonna yes, it'll work, but no, it won't be useful. Right? We'll ban cars so there's no more getaway vehicles. I mean, yes, but no. So I do think about nefarious uses of AI. I think about it a lot, but it's not something you can solve by trying to limit nefarious actors from using AI. I mean, like any piece of infrastructure in our society, you're going to have nefarious uses. I mean, and certainly the monopolies now like to talk about, give us the monopoly, we'll keep it out of the bad guy's hands. And that's just a bullshit argument. You have to just recognize it as such.
It's the TikTok argument.
Which is
What
another ridiculous moral panic. That's a separate moral panic. Right.
Yes.
Make China pay for the data like Russia did in 2016. How is that helping?
Could you address concerns about data storage and how would individuals, so let's say you did have a global public option, how would individuals and governments feel about using an AI model where the data is collected and stored abroad? They're already doing that, right?
Yeah, how do they feel about that now?
Well, the EU doesn't like it, right?
The EU doesn't like it, right? And that might be, they're probably thinking of a EU only model. I mean, if you have a model that would conform to EU privacy regulations, I think it'd be kind of neat. It'd be interesting to see how that works. I mean, I don't know. I'm the nationalizing these things seems, I don't think we can do that anymore. I think we're past that time. But how data moves matters, right? If you have a model that is, it's a medical model. You think about the medical AI. We kind of want to train in all of humanity. Like the more it knows about the vagaries of humans and their bodies and their health, the better it'll be. So that's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's a lot of appropriation going on right now. And you see it talked about where like data from the global south is being used to feed the models in the global north, and the global south doesn't get to benefit. That's a big deal, and that matters. So these are issues you have to deal with. I mean, the corporation is doing an even worse job.
Okay. My esteemed former colleague, Lance Hoffman, asks, how would you have a proposed system handle data provenance and an audit trail, including proof of identity of who provides what data?
I mean, I don't think that's an AI issue. I think that's just a data issue. I mean, you're not going to get mathematical proofs. It's going to be like, this data came from, I don't know, Facebook. This data came from Reddit. We're just gonna know.
The CREATE Act tries to incentivize. That's are you familiar with the CREATE Act? It's an attempt to try to incentivize greater data provenance and transparency. Unfortunately, incentives only work when they address the universe of providers, and one of the problems with it is it's not significant enough incentive. How would you suggest they do it?
In general, when I think about incenting behavior, which is government's job, two ways to do it is you reward the people who do the behavior and you penalize the people who don't. Generally, rewarding the people who do the behavior is more expensive. Like giving people a bonus if they don't murder anybody is much more expensive than arresting murderers. Right? So we don't do that, right? Like we have a system that penalizes the people who do the bad thing. So when I think about incentives, that's essentially what I think about. Incentives, I think right now in the US tend to be things that are lobbied for, and that's like rich people giving rich people more money. But if we want any of these things with AI and how it works, just make what you don't want illegal. I mean, like it works for pajamas that catch on fire. It'll work for this also.
Well, but the problem is, if I may add to Lance's question, the data sets are global and you got to find ways to incentivize the sharing of data among societies that often don't want to work with each other and are competing with each other. One thing, I wrote a paper a while back about renting the data internationally through a cloud-based wicked problems agency. But I'm hearing you say, how would you do that internationally?
I don't know the details. I mean, it's going to be different incentives. If there is truly a public AI, there'll be different incentive structure, whether you want to share or not. I mean, I'm going to make this up. Are people more happy sharing their personal medical records to a public AI that, is designed to help humanity than they would be, letting OpenAI scoop it up? Don't know.
We
don't have follow up there.
Sorry?
Can I ask a follow-up there? So, when OpenAI was created, it was kind of supposed to be this like public good.
Yeah, it didn't last, right?
That, obviously ceased to be the case, right? But like, I guess one thing I would worry about here is like, okay, we invest all this money, we build it, and then some people are like, oh, this is actually really valuable. I should monetize this. And then, it goes the way of every other
But it's
model.
not really valuable, right? It's worth a penny. I mean, this is our problem. It's valuable in aggregate. It is valueless individually. So you're not going to pay individuals for the data. You're going to somehow pay into some pool where the individuals will benefit.
Mhm.
It's not going to work any other way. I mean, I get it. You wrote stuff. You think it's worth something. It's not. And this is weird. But I think the real risk, I said this earlier, is job displacement. That's our fear. We want to get paid, not because we want to get paid, but because we're afraid we're not going to get another book contract. And I think that is a real fear. And so I need to address that. If the market will no longer provide for these types of outputs, society needs to figure out another way to provide for them. And this is tough because this is a massive reorganization of society. But I've always felt that our systems of government and economics were, basically built in the mid-18th century for a mid-18th century world. And they're increasingly not working in the, mid-early 21st century. And that's both democracy and capitalism. But these are not conversations normal people want to have. But it is really clear to me that these systems of governance were suitable for the industrial age and not the information age.
So an attendee asks, what about what is government's role in teaching us to work together with AI and human machine teams? Would the only responsibility
I don't know, right?
then
It's a good
be...
question. I've been writing a lot about AI and democracy. So I think there's a lot of value in government using AI. And these are things like I think AI will have enormous value in helping people navigate bureaucracy. I mean, it's good at filling out forms for people. So it's just so weird. Who would have expected such a thing? I think there's value in sense making sense of a large amount of constituent input. We have seen AI. We have one example I know of an AI writing a law in Brazil, and it was a city. Puerto Alegre, I think it was a city. A legislator went to an AI and said, "I need a bill that does this." It was about water meters. The AI wrote the bill. The human submitted it, whatever process. It was debated. It was voted on. And now it is a law that a human adopted law that AI has written. I think I'm going to see more of that. Like AI is going to be a legislative assistant, and it'll draft bills. It'll draft all sorts of things. I think there's value in the complexity there. I think about AI as adjudicating disputes. It's not going to replace judges, but it'll do judge-like things in certain areas. So I think government can really lead. There are places where, these are AIs not doing anything humans can't do, but doing things for which we don't have enough humans for. Right? In the United States, most local government happens in secret because we've destroyed local journalism. Right? AI can summarize school board meetings where we don't have people to do that. So I think there's a lot of leading by example that will be valuable here. I don't really know what else. We can't force its use. I don't want us to. I mean, I think building a trustworthy AI would be part here. Don't know. And this is sort of as it's going.
We have a question essentially about the accuracy, completeness, and representativeness of data. And this questioner is concerned about that even with government-funded AI, how do we validate the data? Like right now, we only have guidelines in that direction. What do you suggest?
So I think that this is definitely a bigger problem than government AI. I mean, we're going to need to figure out what sorts of regulations are necessary to make these systems trustworthy. I mean, the equivalent of, you can walk into, I'm going to do this in another 15 minutes. I'm going to walk into a restaurant in Harvard Square. I'm going to eat lunch, and I'm not going to go back and check the sanitations of the kitchen. Right? I'm going to trust that the government has handled that. How do we do that with AI? It's going to be similar. No one's going to like it. And it's going to be hard to do. AI moves faster than health codes. But government is how we build these mechanisms of trust.
Right.
Now, whether it's automobiles or airplanes or pharmaceuticals or consumer goods or workplace or financial products, and go on, nuclear power plants, right? On how we build trust. And I don't think there's any different here.
I'll press you a bit on this, because if you look at the EU AI data regulations, what we have is concerns about bias and representativeness. The data sets are really not, they're international, but they're not global.
Right.
And so they're not representative and they're not complete. And I see very little effort at those two attributes. You have any thoughts on that?
So I agree with you. Again, I think it's bigger than government AI or public AI. But yes, I think when we're learning more, it's a lot we're doing. It's sort of interesting that to clean the data, right? So we think about the AI as the data comes in, the model's trained, it's there, we query it, we get answers. But it's really more complex. The data, there's a whole lot of pre-processing to the data before it's fed into the training. And then there's a lot of pre-processing for your queries before they hit the model, and a lot of post-processing of the model's answer before you see it. And I think most of the developments in making these things fair and equitable and complete and usable and all of those things are in all of that middleware. And we're getting better at it. It's an open question about whether the companies want to do the hard work, or whether they just want to pretend to. But that's where I think the developments are.
Okay.
So but yes, I mean, this is a huge area of research. I mean, the EU AI Act is really being written before and during this first year of generative AI, and you can sort of see where parts of it are being rewritten, and this speaks to the problem of slow-moving law trying to regulate fast-moving AI. So we're going to need some sort of agile system that isn't, it's not obvious what it is. I tend to look at the government regulatory agencies as something that can be that can move at a greater speed than Congress.
Okay, on a different topic, what about your thoughts on a government using data harvested from an AI model to reinforce their own power dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, so this is really, we didn't really talk about this. I think AI and power is really important. AI is a technology that augments power. And, we could imagine it being used by us to raise our individual power in relation to government. You can imagine government using it to increase their power. It is not inherently democratizing. It is not inherently benefiting autocracies. Right? All will be able to use it. In general, historically, the more power you have, the more magnification you get from technology. But the more agile you are, the faster you can use it. So this, I mean, to me, is sort of the internet, the quick versus the strong. Right? The dissidents, the activists are able to organize more quickly, and you have the color revolutions. But eventually, power figures out how to use the internet to increase its power, and now it's more of a tool of oppression. AI, could easily follow the same trajectory. Right? I mean, this is a general purpose technology that magnifies power. And I actually do think that power is a part of this conversation which you don't hear enough about. I think it's very important to really think about how how that works.
I think one of the
Um,
tricky things about power is that one of the things power lets you do is collect data, right? Like you gave the sort of, Microsoft wants to, basically watch everything that you do so that, you can build a better AI system, right? Like they can do that in a way that like me as a private citizen
Right.
can't imagine doing that.
Yeah, also you're gonna force use. I mean, getting back to trust, like sometimes, like we are forced to trust the police. It's another use of the same term. Because they're the only game in town. Right? You're forced to trust, I don't know, Google search because they're basically a monopoly. They might not be trustworthy, but they're no viable alternative. So kind of we have no choice but to entrust ourselves to them. I do worry we'll get there with AI, that we'll have no choice but to trust them, even though they're not trustworthy. And it's kind of my goal is to try to make them more trustworthy.
okay, a laudable goal.
Maybe we'll get there.
Do you, if you had a choice between a publicly funded AI or a real law embodying the AI Bill of Rights, which would you pick?
It seems like a weird, why do I don't know. I try to fight hypotheticals, so it's a weird hypothetical.
Okay.
I mean, what is more likely to happen? I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, right, this is the United States and corporate regulations. We don't enforce them. We can't even enforce antitrust. So I worry about laws that don't put CEOs in jail if they break them, because I need actual enforcement. Otherwise, the laws don't work.
Fair enough. What about a public option in other areas of digital infrastructure, such as long-term archiving of government?
You have seen people talk about a digital public square, like a public social network. That this is becoming so important and so critical to society that you can't leave it in the hands of a for-profit corporation, whether it is like a bad actor like Meta or a bad actor like TikTok. So that conversation is happening. It's an interesting conversation to have. Like, are these systems so essential to society that we need to pull them off the market? Now, this is a hard conversation to have because the neoliberals have told us that markets do everything, when in fact they only actually do things that markets do, and they're terrible at dealing with market failures because duh. Don't know. It is worth having that conversation. It's a hard conversation to have just because we don't want to do it, but I think these are important conversations.
I mean, we've had that conversation about social media too, right?
Right.
That hasn't gone very far at this point.
Where I think it has gone is it's interesting, and I think it could possibly succeed is digital twins, because those are clearly infrastructure in the public good. Right. And that's how the British view them, and the EU seems to be moving in that direction. But
so we have a model for that, and it's fiduciaries. Right, there are areas in our society where trustworthiness matters so much that we have additional rules. Doctors, lawyers, accountants. Like, because they need extraordinary access to our data, they have additional legal responsibilities to act in our interests above their interests, right? Fiduciary responsibility to their clients. We could decide to create a category of data fiduciaries, and whether it's social networks or AI training or long-term storage, right? It's a different way of thinking about that relationship. That idea is a couple of decades old, and certainly worth thinking about.
Do you want to make any last comments, Bruce?
That was a good last comment.
Hal, do you want to make any last comments?
No, this is fascinating, though. Thank you so much for joining.
We really appreciate it, Bruce. Thank you for coming, and thank you to our audience and our sponsors.
73 people I saw on who are there.
Well, there were 92 actually, but this is the end of it. So people
all right, so we got boring. That's on us.
I don't know if we got boring, but we were really grateful for people sticking around. And our next webinar will be with the Department of State and Pablo Chavez on digital solidarity. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Bye.